Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I'm going to tell you a story about a dream, the kind of dream so pure and so powerful that you would burn down your entire world just to see it come true. For years, the center of our marriage was an empty space, a quiet, aching void that a child was meant to fill. We decided to fill that void, to pour every last drop of our history, our hope, and our savings into one final, beautiful act of creation. She was the architect of this dream, the warrior who fought for it, the one I trusted with the very soul of our future. I was the one who provided the materials, gladly turning our life's work into the currency of our hope. This story is about the day I discovered that the dream was a lie, the agency was a ghost, and the sacred, empty space we were trying to fill was nothing more than a meticulously designed stage for a betrayal so complete, so fundamentally devastating, that it unmade the very world I thought I knew. The silence was the third person in our marriage. It sat with us at the dinner table, it lay between us in bed at night. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a deep and shared grief, the grief of a dream that had been dying a slow death for a decade. We had endured the clinical indignities of fertility treatments, the emotional roller coaster of hope and failure, a journey that had left our hearts bruised and our spirits weary. We had a good life, a beautiful life in every other respect, a home filled with a quiet, deep, and abiding love. But that love felt incomplete, a story without its most important chapter. The silence was the sound of that missing chapter. She was the one who brought me the first glimmer of a new ending. She came to me one evening, her eyes alight with a fire I hadn't seen in years, a fire I thought had been extinguished by our long winter of disappointment. She had found a way, a different path, international adoption. She had done all the research, her natural brilliance and meticulous nature now focused on this new, singular purpose. She showed me a website on her laptop. It was for a small, private agency, a group that specialized in a small, post-Soviet republic, a place of fairy tale forests and heartbreakingly sad orphanages. The website was simple, clean, and profoundly hopeful. It was filled with pictures of beautiful, serious-eyed children and heartfelt, tearful testimonials from families who had been made whole. She had already spoken with them, she told me, her voice a low, excited tremor. They were kind, they were professional, they were encouraging. They saw us as ideal candidates. The hope that bloomed in my chest was a physical force, a sudden, violent spring after a decade-long winter. It was a lifeline, and I grabbed onto it with the desperation of a drowning man. There was, of course, the price. It was not a price in emotion. We had already paid that 1,000 times over. It was a price in dollars, a number so large, so all-consuming that it took my breath away. It was, to put it simply, everything. It was our savings, the small nest egg we had so diligently built. It was the equity in our home, the 20 years of payments that had turned a mortgage into a sanctuary. It was our retirement, the quiet, comfortable future we had planned for. To do this, we would have to perform a controlled demolition of our entire financial past. I looked at her, at the raw, naked hope in her eyes, a hope that was a perfect mirror of my own, and the decision was not a decision at all. It was an inevitability. What was a house compared to a home? What was a retirement account compared to a future with a child? I saw her in that moment as my savior. I had been sinking into a quiet despair, accepting our fate. She was the one who had refused to surrender. She was the one who had found the path, who had the strength to keep fighting for us. I gave the mission to her completely. She was the general in this new war. She would handle the communications, the paperwork, the complex logistics. My role was simple, elemental. I was to be the provider. I was to turn our life into the fuel for her fight. The great liquidation began. I cashed out my retirement accounts, the numbers on the screen feeling not like a loss but like a down payment on joy. I went to the bank and I signed the papers for a second mortgage, my hand steady, my heart light. I sold things that mattered to me, things that were part of my own story, and I felt no pain. Each sacrifice was a victory, another step closer. I would bring her the money, and she would make the deposits into the special account she had set up for the agency fees. I trusted her so completely, so absolutely, that it was not even a conscious thought. She was the other half of my soul. To doubt her would be to doubt myself. The process, as she related to me, was a series of small, hard-won victories. An application approved, a dossier accepted. She would share these updates with me, her face glowing with the light of our progress. We began to prepare. We painted the spare room. We bought a crib. We spoke of the child, our child, in the present tense. The silence in our home was finally being filled, not with noise, but with the quiet, powerful music of anticipation. My admiration for her was boundless. I saw her strength, her tenacity, her unwavering focus. I was a man in awe, a man who knew, with a certainty that was as real as the ground beneath his feet, that he was the luckiest man in the world. I had no idea that I was not a partner in a dream. I was simply the sole investor in the most elaborate and devastating fraud imaginable. The months of waiting were a strange and beautiful form of purgatory. Our life was on hold, suspended in the sweet agony of anticipation. All our conversations, all our thoughts were directed towards a single point on the horizon, a future that was slowly, inexorably coming into focus. She was the sole conduit for that future, the oracle who would relay the pronouncements from the mysterious, benevolent gods at the agency. Her days were consumed by the process. I would see her in her home office, the door closed, her voice a low, intense murmur on the phone. I would see the light on under the door late at night as she typed emails, wrestling with the complexities of international law and bureaucracy. She had created a cast of characters for me, the people on the other end of the line who were the custodians of our dream. There was the case manager, a woman she described as kind but firm, a seasoned professional who had seen it all. There was the lawyer in the foreign country, a gruff, no-nonsense man who was a bulldog when it came to fighting for his clients. She would recount her conversations with them, her victories and her frustrations. I felt as though I knew these people. They were our team, our allies in this sacred quest. The financial demands continued and they escalated. This, she had warned me, was a normal part of the process. There were always unforeseen costs, bureaucratic hurdles that could only be overcome with a well-placed facilitation fee. A government office had lost our paperwork, and a special payment was required to reconstruct the file. A judge needed a personal assurance in the form of a charitable donation to the local orphanage. Each new demand was a fresh blow, a new source of panic. I had to borrow money, first from the bank, then from my own family, a humiliation that was eclipsed only by the burning necessity of our goal. Each time I would feel the cold dread of our financial ruin, but she was always there to reassure me. She would present these new costs with a face of pained apology as if she were personally absorbing the blow for both of us. "I am so sorry," she would say, her hand on my arm, her eyes full of a shared, weary pain. "I hate asking you for this, but they swear this is the last time. This is the final step. After this, we are through the worst of it." And I would believe her. I would find the money. I had to. We were too far in, too close to the finish line to falter now. My admiration for her strength was mixed with a growing sense of my own inadequacy. She was in the trenches, fighting these daily battles while I was just a spectator. The stress was clearly taking its toll on her. She grew thinner, her sleep was restless. She became fiercely protective of her privacy, the door to her office always closed, her laptop snapping shut if I entered the room unexpectedly. I saw this not as secrecy, but as a symptom of the immense weight she was carrying. She was trying to shield me, to protect me from the ugly, stressful details of the fight. She was my hero, and my only job was to support her, to trust her, to provide the ammunition she needed for the war she was fighting on our behalf. The final victory came, as they so often do, when the hope was almost exhausted. She called me at work, her voice broken by what I instantly recognized as the sound of tears. My heart seized in my chest, my body bracing for the final, fatal blow, and then I heard her say the words. "We have a son," she wept into the phone. "They've given us a match, a little boy. It's him, it's finally him. We have a court date, in 2 weeks. We're going to bring him home." The world exploded into a shower of light and color. The years of gray, of silence, of quiet, aching pain were gone, annihilated in an instant by the pure, white-hot joy of those words. I don't remember the rest of that day. I only remember the feeling, a sense of a profound, fundamental rightness, as if the universe had finally, after a long and cruel delay, corrected itself. I came home to find her in the nursery, the room we had painted with a hopeful, foolish optimism months ago. She was not crying anymore. She was simply standing in the middle of the room, her hand resting on the edge of the empty crib, her face illuminated by a smile so beautiful and so pure it was like looking at the sun. We were a team. We were victorious. We had faced the void and we had filled it. We were going to be a family. I looked at her, my warrior, my champion, the woman whose strength and tenacity had made the impossible possible, and I felt a love so vast it felt like it could power a star. I had no idea I was standing in a room with a stranger, in a house built on lies, celebrating the successful completion of a crime for which I was the only victim. The final 2 weeks were a dream, a beautiful, waking dream from which I never wanted to emerge. The silence in our home was replaced by a joyful, chaotic symphony of preparation. We were a whirlwind of activity, of purpose. We assembled the crib, we bought diapers, we washed tiny clothes and folded them with the reverence of a priest preparing sacred vestments. We were no longer a couple defined by a loss. We were a family defined by an imminent arrival. The love between us, which had been strained and tested by years of grief, was reborn, stronger and brighter than it had ever been. We were a single, united entity, our hearts beating in a shared, triumphant rhythm. The day before our flight, the day we were to embark on the final, sacred journey to meet our son, the dream began to unravel. She was in her office on her laptop, printing out what she said was the final travel document from the agency's secure online portal. I was in the kitchen, a nervous, excited wreck, double-checking our passports for the 100th time. I heard a sound from her office, a small, sharp intake of breath, followed by a quiet, frustrated curse. I walked to the doorway. She was staring at her screen, her face a mask of confusion and growing panic. "What's wrong?" I asked, my own heart beginning a low, anxious thrum. "I can't get on the site," she said, her voice tight. "It's not loading, the server must be down." I felt a flicker of fear, a cold, unwelcome premonition, but I pushed it down. It was a technical glitch, a temporary problem. "Don't worry," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. "Just call them, call the case manager, I'm sure it's nothing." I watched as she picked up her phone. I watched her thumb scroll through her contacts and press a name. I watched her lift the phone to her ear. I heard the silence as it failed to ring. And then I heard the cold, robotic voice of a recorded message, a voice that would become the soundtrack to my nightmares. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." The silence that followed was not the quiet, aching silence of our past. It was a new kind of silence, a dead, terrifying void. My own panic was rising now, a cold, black tide in my chest. "Try the main number," I said, my voice a strained whisper. She did, the same result. "It's a mistake," she said, her voice a high, thin thread of sound. "They've changed their number. Their server is down for maintenance. It has to be." But the look in her eyes was not one of confusion. It was one of pure, animal terror. I rushed to my own computer, my mind a chaotic swirl of denial and dread. I would find them. I would find another way to contact them. I typed the name of the agency, the name that had been a holy scripture to us for over a year, into the search bar. The search results loaded. A few news articles about the challenges of international adoption. A few links to other real agencies. But the website, the portal to our entire future, was gone, not just offline. The domain name was for sale. It had been scrubbed from the internet as if it had never existed. The dream was not just deferred, it had been deleted. I looked at her. She had her head in her hands, her body shaking in what I believed were the silent, racking sobs of a grief that was a perfect mirror of my own. My own heartbreak was a physical thing, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. But in that moment, all I could think of was her pain. She had been the one to lead this charge. She had been the one who had fought so hard. This failure, this final, cruel joke of a universe, would be a wound from which she might never recover. I went to her and I wrapped my arms around her shaking shoulders and I held her. I held her and I whispered that we would get through this, that we still had each other. I held her and I comforted the architect of my own ruin. The days that followed were a shared gray fog of grief. The yellow nursery was a tomb. The tiny clothes were funeral shrouds. We were two ghosts in a house haunted by the ghost of a child who had never been real. We were not just heartbroken, we were annihilated financially and emotionally. We had given everything we had for a lie. When the initial paralyzing shock began to recede, it was replaced by a cold, hard rage. I needed answers. I needed a target. I needed to find the people who had done this, the faceless, soulless monsters who had preyed on our deepest, most sacred vulnerability. I needed to understand how a dream could just vanish into thin air. I went back to the scene of the crime, her laptop. I thought I could find a clue, a name, an email address, anything that would point me in the right direction. I opened her email account, searching for any old correspondence from the agency. I found the old forwarded messages, the ones filled with good news and false hope, but it wasn't enough. On a desperate whim, I opened her trash folder, hoping to find something she had tried to hide, and I found it. Not a letter from the agency. It was an invoice. An invoice from a freelance web developer dated a year and a half ago. The invoice was for the design and hosting of a custom informational website. The name of the website was on the invoice. It was the name of our agency. I kept digging, a cold, sickening dread coiling in the pit of my stomach. I found a hidden folder in her cloud storage, a folder simply labeled Work. Inside was not a single file, but hundreds. There were the original design files for the website's logo. There were the raw, unedited stock photos of the smiling children. There were the Word documents, the drafts of the official-looking letters she had received from the agency, filled with her own edits and tracked changes. And in a final, password-protected subfolder, the password was the name we had chosen for our son. I found the banking records. A series of statements from a hidden offshore account, an account that now held the entire liquidated value of my life. There was no agency, there was no case manager, there was no lawyer, there was no son. There was only her. It had all been a performance, a long, meticulous, and brilliantly executed con, and I was not her partner. I was the mark. The world did not just stop, it was unmade. I was a man adrift in a vacuum, all the laws of my own personal physics suddenly and irrevocably repealed. The woman I had spent half my life with, the woman I had just held in my arms and comforted, was not just a stranger, she was my destroyer. The love I felt for her, the profound, worshipful admiration, did not just die. It curdled into something black and toxic, a form of self-loathing so profound it was a physical sickness. I had not just been fooled, I had been the willing, eager, and primary architect of my own ruin. I walked out of her office, the laptop in my hand, its screen a glowing testament to her monstrous deception. I found her in the living room, staring out the window, a perfect, tragic portrait of a grieving mother. The performance was not over. It would never be over. I did not speak. I simply placed the laptop on the coffee table in front of her. I had opened the folder, the one with the bank statements from the offshore account. Her name, and her name alone, was at the top of the page. She looked down at the screen. Her face, which had been a soft, sorrowful mask, did not change. It simply went blank. The actress had left the stage. All that was left was the cold, empty space where a person should have been. Why? The word was a dry, rasping sound from my throat, a single, pathetic question in the face of a betrayal so vast it defied all questions. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Her eyes were not the eyes of the woman I knew. They were the eyes of a stranger, flat, cold, and utterly devoid of any light. "Because I was drowning," she said, her voice a calm, even monotone that was more chilling than any scream could have been. "And you were the anchor." I stared at her, not understanding. Drowning in what? Our life was good, our love was real. "I was drowning in you," she continued, a flicker of something, perhaps long-simmering contempt in her voice. in your quiet, decent, suffocating goodness, in this perfect, boring little life you were so proud of. And most of all, I was drowning in your dream. The child, the family, that was your obsession, your answer to everything. It was never mine. I was trapped in it, trapped in your endless, hopeful, pathetic story. Her words were not an explanation, they were a vivisection. She was methodically cutting me open, showing me the rot that had been festering at the core of our marriage for years. The dream I thought we shared, the one that I believed was the ultimate expression of our love, had been my prison for her. "So you destroyed me," I said, the words feeling hollow, inadequate. "You took everything. My money, my hope, my past, my future. You took it all." "I took what I was owed," she said, her voice still a chilling, flat line. "For the years I spent playing a part I never auditioned for, I built a better story, a story where I get to be free. And you, with your endless, bottomless well of trust, you paid for the production." I looked at this creature in the shape of my wife, and I felt the last, lingering embers of my love for her die and turn to cold, hard ash. There was nothing left to say. There was no argument to be made, no plea for understanding. I had been in a relationship with a phantom, a brilliant, beautiful, and utterly soulless void. I turned and walked to the door. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a hole in the center of my being where a life used to be. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice holding not a trace of concern but the simple, practical curiosity of a businessperson concluding a transaction. I stopped at the door, my hand on the knob. "I don't know," I said. "You were my map, and you led me off the edge of the world." I walked out of that house and into the cold, empty street. I was a man who had been erased. The void we had once spoken of, the one a child was meant to fill, was no longer a metaphor. It was my new reality. I was broke, I was heartbroken, and I was utterly, completely, and irrevocably alone. The legal system offered no solace. The money was in a place beyond the reach of laws I understood, in an account tied to a woman who had vanished as completely as the fictional agency she had created. The house was gone, the debts were mine, and the life I had known was a memory that was also a lie. The years that followed were not a story of recovery. They were a story of survival, a long, slow, and brutal process of learning to breathe again. There was no new love, no second chance at a family. There was only the quiet, daily, and profoundly unglamorous work of rebuilding a man from his own ashes. I found my way back not by trying to fill the void, but by learning to live with it. I started to work with children, real children, in a small, underfunded community center in the worst part of the city. I did not do it to find a replacement for the son I had never had. I did it because their needs were real, their pain was honest, and their small, fierce sparks of hope were a light in my own profound darkness. They taught me a lesson I had been too blind to see. A family is not a dream you can buy. A life is not a story you can write in advance. It is something you build, one small, honest, and often painful day at a time. I will never be the man I was. The trusting, hopeful man who believed in a perfect, all-consuming love is a ghost, but the man who remains is stronger. He is a man who has stared into the abyss of a perfect betrayal and has found a way to crawl out not whole but alive. The dream is dead, but the love I had for that dream, the capacity to love that deeply, that completely, that was real. That was the best part of me, and that is the one thing she could not take. It is the one thing I have left to build a new life with, a smaller, quieter, but finally honest life on a foundation of my own. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.